Greetings and welcome back to our daily English news right here on TMH with me, Deletna Dewalko. Our headlines for today include Ethiopian government bombed civilian targets on the outskirts of Ma'ala, injuring several people, including children. Residents of Mariam Dingalat in Tigray commemorate 154 civilians killed by Eritrean troops last year. Britain's former foreign secretary says Ethiopian prime minister should be stripped of Nobel Peace Prize. The Ethiopian government has bombed civilian targets on the outskirts of Ma'ala, injuring several people, including children. In yet another airstrike on the regional capital yesterday, Abiy Ahmed's government has caused several civilian casualties, including 6, and then their older children.
The aircraft came and dropped the bomb here. It hit me while I was playing. We were playing on the threshold of our house. The aircraft came and bombarded our house. The shrapnel fell on top of me. My brother was lying there. It was very scary. My kids were outside. When the aircraft bombarded, I was shocked as I didn't know where exactly my kids were. So I went outside to look for them. Then I saw one of my sons had fallen over there. The other was lying there with the shrapnel on top of him. The house is demolished. This house belongs to us, peasants. I think this is deliberate attack on civilians. It's a genocide.
We were having lunch when the bomber aircraft came. I was worried for my kids. We eventually found them burrows under the debris, and so we dug them out. The families of the victims said that the bombings on the civilians were desperate attempts and measures by Abiy Ahmed's government that is facing heavy defeats on the war front. In related news, reports have emerged that Abiy Ahmed's government has also killed more than 1,000 innocent civilians in the Welaga region of Ethiopia's Oromia by drones and airstrikes in the last 2 days. According to Oromo activists at Gayararsa, Kiramu, Gidayana, Limu, and Ibantu areas of Welaga were targeted in the indiscriminate attack on the civilians. The air bombardments of civilians also continued yesterday in the Guji area of Oromia. The government of Abiy Ahmed has also bombed the Takaza hydroelectric dam, causing total blackout in the whole region of Tigray. The government of Tigray said these aerial bombardments on the Takaza hydroelectric dam is a continuation of the genocidal campaign and the denial of basic services to annihilate the people of the government in the face of Tigray earth. The government of Tigray called on the people to step up its efforts to do away with this fascist regime. 14 children under malnutrition have died at the Ida Referral Hospital in Ma'ala. Recent months, Tekla'ab Gabra Mariam, who's in charge of the ward for under 5 children, said 166 children were admitted to the hospital due to malnutrition-induced illnesses from the end of June to the 24th of November, and 14 of them have died.
The number of children admitted to the hospital due to malnutrition has this year increased 3-fold compared to the figure last year.
Gabra Mariam added that the psychological stress is also exacting a toll on the medical personnel.
We are heartbroken as we could not help these patients as we should. When the mothers cry bereaved, we also cry. It is sad we are helpless and that we could not save some of these children simply because we don't have medicine, equipment, or lack of milk powder. We also suffer with the mothers.
He called for the government to end their siege on Tigray region, which he blamed for the deaths of children and the suffering of the people as a whole. Today marks 1 year since the Mariam Dingalat massacre, when 154 priests, elders, children, and newlyweds were killed because of their Tigrayan identity. Mariam Dingalat is one of the sites of the heinous atrocity crimes committed by Eritrean troops on civilians in Tigray. Timnit Bayru presents the story compiled by reports from CNN as well as Tigray television.
They thought they'd be safe at a church. Then the soldiers arrived, read a CNN report titled Massacres in the Mountains, which depicts what happened on that faithful day exactly a year ago. The corpses, some dressed in white church robes, drenched in blood, were scattered in arid fields, scrubby farmlands, and a dry riverbed. Others had been shot on their doorsteps, with their hands bound with belts. Among the dead were priests, old men, women, entire families, and a group of more than 20 Sunday school children. According to eyewitnesses, parents, and their teachers, some as young as 14. As clashes raged, hundreds of other displaced people escaped to Dangalat, a nearby village in a craggy valley ringed by steep, rust-colored cliffs. They sought shelter at Mariam Dangalat, a historic monastery complex famed for centuries-old rock-hewn church. On November 30th, they were joined by scores of religious pilgrims for the Orthodox festival of Zion Mariam, an annual feast to mark the day Ethiopians believe the Ark of the Covenant was brought from Jerusalem. The holy day was a welcome respite from weeks of violence, but it would not last. A group of Eritrean soldiers opened fire on Mariam Dangalat Church, while hundreds of congregants were celebrating Mass. People tried to flee on foot, scrambling up cliff paths to neighboring villages. The troops followed, spraying the mountainside with bullets. The soldiers went door to door, dragging people from their homes. They tied their hands to their backs. They forced them to crawl barefoot on the sand. They were also beating some of them. Their actions and killings were full of cruelty. They killed whole families, mine and the neighbors. One of my daughters was a lactating mother. They took ropes from my house to tie all the young victims. They massacred them all. Mothers were forced to tie up their sons. A pregnant woman was shot, her husband killed. Mothers, the survivors like this one, who was shot at 4 times, hid under bodies of the dead. We were all sitting here, our hands tied behind our backs. After speaking among themselves, they ordered us to lie down. Then the commander told one of the soldiers, "Kill them." Another soldier had cocked his gun and directed against us, so that we wouldn't even raise our heads. Other soldiers then shot at each of us. I was shot, but the bullet went through my back. He left me for dead. One of my sons was an outstanding student in the university. He could have helped me and his country. My other son here was also top of his class. Some of them were members of the church choir. They told the soldiers they were servants of the church. They showed them hymns and religious books. How can one kill such innocent souls? The mayhem continued for 3 days, with soldiers slaughtering local residents, displaced people, and pilgrims. Finally, on December 2nd, the soldiers allowed informal burials to take place, but threatened to kill anyone they saw mourning. They are among thousands of civilians believed to have been killed in the genocidal war against the people of Tigray. U.S. State Department spokesperson had at the time said, "Reports of a massacre at Mariam Dangalat are gravely concerning and demand an investigation." The joint investigation by the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights and the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission never investigated the Mariam Dangalat massacre and similar other massacres in Tigray. Mariam Dangalat hosted a memorial combined with a festival this year. No trauma services have yet reached the community.
A journalist has gone missing A nation's correspondent has mysteriously disappeared while on duty in Ethiopia. Tesfa Alam Takhla, who's a nation's correspondent in Addis Ababa, who disappeared after being released by the law enforcement officers in the country. The journalist had initially been apprehended in Ethiopia's capital on the 31st of October, and he was charged with insulting the ruling party and have links with extremist groups. Takhla was released on bail on the 4th of November. That is when he mysteriously disappeared, prompting Nation's management to take immediate action. In their course of action, Nation has petitioned the Ethiopian government. The Media House has written the Ministry of Justice and copied to the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission. Nation's Media Group's editorial director, Mutuma Matthew, said, "We are concerned about the safety of Tesfa and appealed to the authorities to disclose his whereabouts and the circumstances under which he is being held." The case involving the Nation media journalist is not an isolated case. This case of media constrictions have been escalating since the breakout of the war in Ethiopia. The Committee to Protect Journalists says it has noted an increase in the case of harassment and the arrests of journalists in just this past year alone. Senator Chris Coons calls on Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed to resolve the conflict there before millions die from both violence as well as starvation. The senator urged the Prime Minister to take a step back from the brink and the embrace of negotiation.
This war has gotten absolutely out of hand, and the Prime Minister has the ability to call for a ceasefire, to negotiate, and to seek a resolution to this conflict before millions die from both violence and starvation. I think he has an opportunity here to show that he earned the Peace Prize based on his commitment to peacemaking rather than what is currently the path he's on. Last point, if I could, Christian, social media is playing a critical role here, helping to accelerate some of the ethnic-based language and activities that are happening here that are very concerning. This is a tinderbox, a region that if it goes up, could have real consequences, not just in Ethiopia, but throughout the region, and frankly, in some ways, the world.
Was the Ethiopian leader to show that he has earned his Peace Prize. Britain's former Foreign Secretary says Ethiopian Prime Minister should be stripped of his Nobel Peace Prize. Britain's former Foreign Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, said there was a genocide happening in Tigray, Abiy Ahmed's watch, and the conservative former Foreign Secretary Hunt suggested it was a high time that Ethiopia's leader, Abiy Ahmed, return the prize, which was awarded to him in 2019, for ending his country's stalemate with neighboring Eritrea. And Abiy is reported this month to have begun leading frontline troops in his government's conflict with Tigrayan forces after vowing to bury the enemy with blood and bones. He said his government should work with its partners like the United States, the AU, and the other Western countries to stand a message to Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed that there can be no international aid channeled through the Ethiopian government until the genocide stops. Wera Hobhouse, the Liberal Democrat MP for Bath on this part, said the conflict in Tigray has dramatically escalated in the last year, adding his constituents in the Bath, who have family detained in the capital of Ethiopia, have not heard from them for the past year alone. He urged the government of the UK to put enough pressure on the government of Ethiopia to make sure that all of those unlawfully detained across the country are released immediately. That concludes our news for today. Thank you for tuning in.